Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Clemson. My name is Sara Summers-Hoskin, and I'm going to be your worship associate this morning. We are located on the land of the Eastern Cherokee and Southern Iroquois, and so that is historically important to us as a congregation. Here at UUFC, we welcome all of those who come seeking a spiritual home among us, whether this is your 100th time or your first. If you happen to be a first-time visitor, we would love to get to know you. Okay, so if you are here in person, for the first time and you have any questions, please seek out one of our members here, and we will be glad to answer questions for you. We have a welcome table that's right outside the doors out here, and please stay for conversation after the service also in our social room, which is right down the hall and to the left. If you are at home and online, we would be happy for you to receive our newsletter so that you can know more about us. And you can find us at uufc.org. So I'd like to just focus a little bit now about on some of our announcements for this morning. So we've got these on the back of your bulletin if you want to just take a minute to look at those. I think I would like to focus on 2 or 3 of these, and there's a big list back here, so if you're but we would like to invite you to join us for a discussion of proposed changes to the Article 2, which is the principles and purposes of the UUA bylaws. We had the first session yesterday here in the social room, and our second session is actually going to be online via Zoom on Wednesday, January the 17th, and so that's this coming Wednesday at 6:30. So registration is not necessary, but very greatly appreciated. And so if you look in your newsletter, or I think there is also a way to find out how to get the link for that Zoom meeting here on in our announcements. So, but if you look in the newsletter, you can just click on the link to and get registered for that, and then you'll be good to go. I would be very sorry if I did not recognize our upcoming talent show that's going to be February the 3rd. Okay, where are you, Wei? Okay, so Wei is over here. He is the person that is, he's the director of the show, and if you have anything that you would like to contribute, we need people to do music, stories, acts, whatever you can contribute is very welcome. So you can sign up by either talking to Wei or emailing him. Okay, so let's rise in body and spirit, and we're going to sing together hymn number 95, There Is More Love Somewhere. I'd like to share these opening words with you. Theodore Parker said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience, but from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic." Power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power, correcting everything that stands against love. We would like to now invite you to share a chalice lighting and words of affirmation by Reverend Holly.
Thank you, and I'd like to invite Aurelia up to help me with lighting our chalice as I invite you all to join in reading our words of affirmation, which you can find in your order of service. We gather together in the spirit of love, with justice as our guide. This is our chosen covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth with freedom, and to care for one another. Thank you. And Karen's going to share our time for all ages. Thank you, Aurelia.
This morning, this is Martin Luther King Jr. Weekend. This morning I thought I'd share a story of one of the lesser-known heroes of the Civil Rights Movement. We talk a lot about people who have done big things and made grand gestures, but I want to share this morning a story about someone who did something that might seem small, but was actually very large and was a wonderful way to show love and care for their community. Our story this morning is Pies from Nowhere, or How Georgia Gilmore Sustained the Montgomery Bus Boycott, by D. Romito. When Georgia Gilmore was a young girl, she lived on a farm in Alabama where she fed pigs and milked the cows. Georgia did her best to listen to what her mother taught her. Think twice before doing anything you might regret, and never hate anyone. Georgia grew up and soon had a family of her own. She did plenty of cooking along the way, and when it was time for something sweet, she knew just what to do. She'd blend butter and sugar in a bowl to get her homemade pound cake started, and then add tea bags to a pot of water for a new batch of sweet tea. Georgia was a cook at the National Lunch Company in downtown Montgomery, Alabama. Because of segregation laws, the restaurant counter was separated into two sections, one side for white customers, one side for black customers. Georgia knew it was wrong, but that was the way things had always been. On December 1st, 1955, Georgia was working at the restaurant when a news alert came over the radio. A black woman named Rosa Parks had been arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a bus to a white passenger as the law demanded. Already a civil rights activist, Rosa was tired of giving in to rules that were unjust. And she wasn't the only one. The next day, an association of black women distributed a flyer asking people to boycott public transportation on Monday. It read, "Please stay off all buses." Georgia watched as buses drove down the street, one after another. Empty, empty, empty. Because she'd been treated poorly by the white driver so many times before, Georgia hadn't ridden the buses for 2 months. Still, she wanted to be a part of the movement she saw growing. Not long after, she went to Holt Street Baptist Church to hear Reverend Ralph Abernathy and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speak. The church was full. The crowd overflowed onto the street outside. Large speakers had been set up so thousands more could hear. Dr. King spoke about doing good things for one another. He talked about freedom, unity, equality. We are determined here in Montgomery to work and fight until justice runs down like the water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Those were things Georgia believed in, and she was willing to fight for them. So Georgia decided to help the best way she knew how. She worked with a group of women in her community, and together they purchased the supplies they needed: bread, lettuce, chickens, and then they went off to cook. The women brought food to the meetings that followed at the church. They sold sandwiches. They sold dinners in their neighborhoods. As the boycotters walked and walked, Georgia cooked and cooked. And boy, did the people of Montgomery love her food. Georgia donated the profits from her sales to the Montgomery Improvement Society, which helped fund the boycott. But if anyone had found out these women were involved, they could have lost their jobs. So Georgia ran the operation, and the other women acted as secret helpers. See, the way I figured it, people always had to eat. So I made the pies, Georgia said. The women sold baked goods to stores, groceries, laundromats, and beauty shops in their neighborhoods, and people paid in cash so they wouldn't be connected to aiding the boycott. Sweet potato pie, peach pie, red velvet cake, 7-Up cake. When was the last time you heard about that? Only Georgia knew who baked them, and only Georgia knew who bought them. On Monday and Thursday, Georgia would go early to the boycott strategy meetings at the church. She'd walk up to the collection plate and announce how much her group was contributing. There was cheering, clapping, foot stomping. But whenever people asked where the money came from, she remembered her promise to keep it a secret. It came from nowhere, she'd say. Because of this, her brave group of women bakers became known as the Club from Nowhere. The club not only raised enough to purchase gas for the carpool system that had been set up for the boycott, but they were also able to buy station wagons to aid the effort and help get people where they needed to go. But Montgomery didn't want their buses continuing to lose money, so the city did what it could to stop the protesters in their efforts. Dr. King and 89 others were arrested for their roles in the boycott, and Georgia was called to speak in court about an instance when a bus driver had mistreated her. After she had already paid, the driver demanded she get off and enter through the back of the bus, as black riders were forced to do at the time. When I reached the back door and was about to get on, he shut the back door and pulled off, and I didn't even ride the bus after paying my fare. So I decided right then and there I wasn't going to ride the buses anymore, Georgia testified. Georgia knew she was doing the right thing by standing up for her fellow protesters, but news of the trial spread across the country like wildfire. When the National Lunch Company found out she was part of the boycott, she was fired from her job. Georgia was unemployed and raising 6 children on her own. She needed to find a way to support her family. Dr. King encouraged her to start her own business. All these years you've worked for somebody else. Now it's time you worked for yourself, he said. He helped her improve the kitchen in her home, and Georgia got new pots and pans and cooking supplies. Word soon got around, and people came to eat at Georgia's. When they came to her house for a meal, they would eat wherever they could find a seat. And if they couldn't find a seat, they'd eat standing up. Georgia loved to talk and joke with her customers and friends. Soon enough, there were long lines to get a meal cooked by her. People ordered meals for delivery, too. Georgia was making hundreds of lunches each day. She packed up fried chicken, black-eyed peas with okra, fresh corn muffins, and apple pie, and sent her kids out to deliver them. If you were lucky, you might even get some of her homemade mac and cheese. She was providing good food for her community, but she was also bringing the people of Montgomery together, black and white. Dr. King frequently had meals at Georgia's house. Because she was a big woman with a big personality, he lovingly called her Tiny. And because civil rights leaders knew they could trust Georgia, her home became a place for important and often secret meetings. I just served them and let them talk, she'd say. On November 13th, 1956, Georgia was cooking in her kitchen, listening to music on the radio, when the station interrupted the song to deliver the news. The Supreme Court had declared that segregation on buses was illegal. The boycotters had won. Georgia was thrilled. People could ride the bus and sit anywhere they desired. At the next church meeting, Georgia sat in her seat and listened as Dr. King announced that the Montgomery bus boycott was a success. "We didn't have to walk no more," said Georgia. "Even before Martin Luther King Jr. got up there and told us it was over, we knew it was over and we had won." Still, there would be more battles to fight. So Georgia Gilmore kept right on cooking.
Oh, I love that story. Yeah. Okay, this is a time that we set aside for the offering in order to give toward the financial vitality of this community. 25% of our weekly collection goes to an organization in the local community that we partner with. For the month of January, we are partnering with Clemson Child Development Center. And so for those at home, you can go to the UUFC website and use the donate button. There you will see options for paying your pledge and donating towards the organizations we partner with. Thank you for your generosity.
Thank you for these gifts and your generosity to this congregation. Share our joys and concerns each week. It is a time of sacred sharing of ourselves with one another, whether they are read aloud or remain quiet and tender upon our hearts. It's a time that allows us to love and care for one another. And it is a reminder that we are not alone and that we are cared for. As I read our joys and concerns today, I've asked Sara to place a stone into the shared vessel, which represents this community of caring. And I have a joy from Karen Sanders that Dave Sanders has made it safely to China, which is good news. And I have a joy, while still being somewhat of a concern, an update from Nancy Simmons that she is recuperating from her recent fall where she has had broken her foot at home. And so she's at home recuperating. And we place one more stone into the bowl representing all of the joys and concerns that remain unspoken. So if you will now join in singing our children's recessional, singing them on their way to our religious education classes this morning. Depending on what you heard in your neighbors singing next to you, there's the version that's written in the hymnal, which is what's up on the slides, and then there's the alternative version of May the Spirit of Love that some of us use as well, just as a note in case you're wondering about that difference. So I invite you into a moment of kind of prayerful meditation to hear these words by Carrie Gottfried. Love loudly, spirit of light, spirit of life and love, of all that is good and bad and in between. Give me the courage and inspiration to love loudly, to share my joy and compassion with others, to let them know how much I appreciate them. We all give and receive love, but loving loudly is one of the greatest gifts of all, and it is so simple. All it requires is one person who is willing to say to anyone and everyone, "You are loved." Spirit of life, help me spread love throughout my communities. Help me teach others to love loudly so that it begins to circle round so I can hear it too. Now have a moment of continued meditation with a musical moment.
Thank you, Corey. I would like to share with you an excerpt from All About Love, and this is by Bell Hooks. A commitment to a spiritual life requires us to do more than read a good book or go on a restful retreat. It requires conscious practice, a willingness to unite the way we think with the way we act. Spiritual life is first and foremost about commitment to a way of thinking and behaving that honors principles of interbeing and interconnectedness. When I speak of the spiritual, I refer to the recognition within everyone that there is a place of mystery in our lives where forces that are beyond human desire or will alter circumstances and or guide and direct us. I call these forces divine spirit. When we choose to lead a spirit-filled life, we recognize and celebrate the presence of transcendent spirits. Some people call this presence soul, God, the beloved, higher consciousness, or higher power. Still others say this force is what it is because it cannot be named. To them, it is simply the Spirit moving in us and through us. A commitment to spiritual life necessarily means we embrace the eternal principle that love is all, everything, our true destiny. Despite overwhelming pressure to conform to the culture of lovelessness, we still seek to know love. That seeking is itself a manifestation of divine spirit. Life-threatening nihilism abounds in contemporary culture, crossing the boundaries of race, gender, and nationality. At some point, it affects all our lives. Everyone I know is at times brought low by feelings of depression and despair about the state of the world. Whether it is the ongoing worldwide presence of violence expressed by the persistence of man-made war, hunger, and starvation, the day-to-day reality of violence, the presence of life-threatening diseases that cause the unexpected deaths of friends, comrades, and loved ones. There is much that brings everyone to the brink of despair. Knowing love, or the hope of knowing love, is the anchor that keeps us from falling into that sea of despair. Spirituality and spiritual life give us the strength to love. It is rare for individuals to choose a life in the Spirit, one that honors the sacred dimensions of everyday life, when they have had no contact with traditional religious thought or practice. I think it's time now for our music video, Let Justice Roll Down.
Morally, I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society, and it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons, and I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
There is no freedom, the wise man said, let justice roll down, when the poor cry out for shelter and bread, let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Hatred will never drive out hate. Let love roll down, roll down. Remember, our hearts can make us great. Let love roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let your love roll down like a mighty stream. When brutality threatens our daughters and sons, let peace roll down, roll down. May our voices rise up louder than the guns. Let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Step by step, one by one, let justice roll down, roll down. prophet, but the dream lives on. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you carry, we walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream.
I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
So, have any of you ever just had a hard time deciding what to talk about, what to include in conversation, especially if it's around an issue that you feel is important? Well, I'm going to hope that everything ties together the way I want it to today.
I was led to nonviolence because
with the recognition that I had so many things, so many tangents when I was preparing for today, that if things feel a little disjointed, please forgive me, because I was trying to include too many things, perhaps. Yes. Including seeing something after I wrote all of this yesterday on Facebook from a colleague last night. So throw that in there too. But today, not because it's just Martin Luther King Jr.'s kind of commemorative day tomorrow, but it's also would have been his 95th birthday if he were still living. And so I want to make sure that we could honor him and his legacy, and also connect it to what is inspiring about our denomination, connect it back to our faith, so that it's not just saying, oh, we're going to honor Dr. King, which is important, but also why is it important to us? And so the quote that Sara read first this morning, how many are you familiar with that version of the quote from Theodore Parker? A few of you, yes, okay. Well, Theodore Parker was one of our Unitarian theologians back in the early mid-1800s. And this is where that original statement comes from. But perhaps you are familiar with a shortened, more succinct version of it from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that version says, we shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So something that you might not be aware of, one of the times that he shared this, not the only time, but one of the times he shared this was at the UU General Assembly at the Ware Lecture in 1966. So, at the Ware Lecture, he also lifted up his connections to Unitarian Universalism and his understanding of it. He mentioned that he had attended a Unitarian church while he was in seminary in Boston. And in an interview that I read last night from Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt, she said in a conversation she later had with Coretta Scott King that she and Dr. King had enjoyed attending the Unitarian church very much, but he didn't think he could do what he needed to do in the movement in our denomination. So he also mentioned some of our civil rights activists specifically the deaths of UU Reverend James Reeb and Mrs. Viola Luiso. I'm not sure that I said her name right, so please excuse that if I did not. But in this speech that he gave, as well as in others like it, he referred to Rip Van Winkle. Who's here is familiar with the tale of Rip Van Winkle? He went up and fell asleep for 100 years or so, and when he came back down, the sign on the tavern had changed from King George to George Washington. He had literally slept through the American Revolution. And so King's speech to us as UUs, among others, when he gave it in other places, was to encourage us not to sleep through the revolution of the civil rights movement that was going on, where he was, from his perspective at the time. And I wondered, but then I went and did some research to see where he said it for the first time. But I have to say, I wondered, did he use that quote about the arc of the moral universe because of knowing our Unitarian ancestor was the one that coined it? But no, he had said it in 1965 before he came and did the Ware lecture. But it is an interesting connection that we have to that piece of history. But with that in mind, I pose a question to you that a seminary professor posed to me and a class of students studying the ethic around MLK, the great, as a specialized class that focused almost solely on Dr. King. Does the arc of the moral universe actually really bend towards justice? Hearing a lot of hmms and head nods and quizzical looks. But then I thought about it some more. From the perspective of Theodore Parker in 1853, when he wrote that, how different the world must look 171 years later. How much would he think the arc has bent towards justice? He was an abolitionist and might think that the accomplishment of ending slavery was a mark of success in that arc bending towards justice. But he knew that it was long, that it wasn't something that he could see the end of. But he might think we've made significant progress by now. And then I wonder about what Dr. King thought. His death came a few days after he shared this quote about the arc of the moral universe for the final time. That was 56 years ago. And there has been progress since his death, but there's also been backlash. I sometimes wonder if instead of the arc bending towards justice, if we're not just a great big pendulum swinging, it's making an arc. But is it really always moving towards justice, or are we moving back and forth? Are there so many ups and downs that it is hard for us to see where that justice ends? And what is our driving force and belief that it can, if we believe that it can still bend towards justice? What is holding us in that belief? Both Parker and King were working from a Christian framework. Our Unitarian Christian ancestors believing in the unity of God rather than the Trinitarian view of God, but still believing in God as part of the moral universe. For them, especially for King. He was very clear that Jesus was at the center. King and many other liberationist theologians, for them, Christ is salvific and liberatory. But for us, as Unitarian Universalists, and even thinking about the fact that Dr. King may have said that he couldn't do his important work of justice from within our denomination, what is holding us? What is calling us to do the work of justice? When we show up in our yellow t-shirts at justice demonstrations, they say side with love, or if you have an older one, standing on the side of love, there's a song of that name in our hymnal. But what are we doing showing up for justice? On some level, I think the t-shirts speak for themselves, that love is there. It is what is calling us over and again to the work of justice in this world. Going back to the quote from Bell Hooks earlier, love is all. However, I don't think that we've always done a really good job of articulating what it is that is the foundation, our theology. Because who here gets a little like, about the word theology or God? Few folks. And that's something that has been part of our denomination because so many have come from other faith traditions, some having been hurt by those faith traditions and looking for something different. Although I do think that's beginning to change, and we're seeing a lot more newer folks coming from non-religious backgrounds or spiritual but not religious individuals. I also want to point out, though, that UUs don't necessarily have one theology. I took a class in seminary that was called UU Theologies because there are many different theologies, not meaning what we believe in God specifically, but what we find meaning in or with among us. Excuse me. So this was something that was brought up for the Article 2 Study Commission, which this is the group of folks that were charged to consider what changes we maybe should make or could make to Article 2, which is where the principles and purposes are housed. We had a discussion about it yesterday, and we'll have one later this week. They were asked to consider where love fit into that, because there's all these representations. Our Side with Love campaign, words in our hymnals, the hymns that we are singing today, and many others. And in surveys, seeing that love kept coming up again and again as something central to our faith. But if any of you were here last Sunday, or just as a quick recap, love can be defined in so many ways. The Time for All Ages last week asked over and over and over again what love meant to the different people in the book, and every single one of them had a different answer. The Greeks had 7 different words for love. This month, our theme is liberating love. It's part of what is being proposed in the changes, but also is part of our Soul Matters packet of information. So if anybody participates in covenant groups, this is something that can help guide those. It helps guide our worship and some of the things we do with religious education. Love is bigger than ourselves. Liberating love is certainly bigger than ourselves. It's what love looks like in action, in justice work. And so I could have told you so many quotes from Bell Hooks' book, All About Love. I recently read it and was like, oh, like, this is good. Okay, so we narrowed it down. And Sara asked me this morning, she was like, it kind of just like ends. I was like, well, I couldn't figure out where else to end it. It could go on. There's so much good stuff there. But I do want to reflect back and emphasize for a moment a quote that was part of that longer reading that Sara shared. A commitment to spiritual life necessarily means that we embrace the eternal principle that love is all. Everything, our true destiny, despite overwhelming pressure to conform to a culture of lovelessness. We seek to know love. That seeking is itself a manifestation of the divine spirit. This quote helped me a little bit more deeply connect to this idea of liberation theology within the Christian context, but also to a theology of love. There's a whole chapter in her book that is an ethic of love that is really great if you get a chance. There's also videos of each of the chapters of that book available on YouTube. But Bell Hooks isn't UU, and she's not espousing something that is completely devoid of God, but she names all of the different ways in which we can see the divine represented in the world around us, something that connects us together. She speaks so eloquently about love, what it can mean to us, not from just a faith perspective, but from our humanity. There are so many more quotes in this book that I could pull from, like I said. But I was also looking at a book full of sermons from Dr. King this week, and really found something that I thought was interesting. A statement that he made that kind of makes me wonder about the connection to Unitarian churches in Boston, because in one of his sermons, he talks about humanism. And if you don't know, religious humanism is part of our Unitarian ancestry with Reverend John Dietrich, who is one of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto in 1933. But King said, quote, "Humanist hope is an illusion based on too great an optimism concerning the inherent goodness of human nature." He continues to say, I would be the last to condemn the thousands of sincere, dedicated people outside the churches who have labored unselfishly through various humanitarian movements to cure the world of social evils. For I would rather a man be committed humanist than an uncommitted Christian. But so many of these dedicated persons seeking salvation within the human context have become understandably pessimistic and disillusioned because their efforts are based in the kind of self-delusion that which ignores fundamental facts about our moral nature. So I had some mixed feelings about that quote. Part of it I was like, yes, okay, he would rather us be good humanists than uncommitted Christians. And at first I thought, oh, that would be good to share, but then I thought, well, maybe it's a little disingenuous to share just that part, because he had more that he had to say. And there's a whole sermon that goes into a lot more than that. So, what is it that we believe? What is it that undergirds and sustains us as a faith? There was a question that was posed to me and several other UUs at the Greenville unit, which was Not the one here in South Carolina, but the one in North Carolina, congregation that I attended at the time. We had a vegetarian potluck that was community-wide, not just the congregation, and someone attending said, "But what do y'all believe?" And I don't think any answer except for belief in a divine that she could understand would have been met with like acceptance of that. But we spoke about the 7 principles and the 6 sources and the justice work that we do. She said, "Well, what makes you any different than the Sierra Club?" What makes you different than a social club? And that has rattled around in my brain a lot, especially as I had to write my own understanding in seminary. My very first semester, I had to write my credo, my statement of what I believe, what my theology is. And I didn't have the easy shorthand of the Book of Common Prayer and the denominational documents that my classmates in seminary had. I had to figure it out for myself because, as I said, we have UU theologies. There are many. For me, the center of that is of love and liberation. That's what I could articulate. That is my understanding of the divine. How do we continue to connect with one another to the justice work that we do as a faith tradition? What holds us together? How and where do you see the divine or our hope in humanity? Because not all of us see the divine. I believe that regardless of our notions of the divine, we have some understanding of what both love and justice have as part of our understandings, even though they're varied, even though we have different definitions. Because it is so hard to define what love means, but it can help us undergird our justice work, calling us to side for love for many years and the proposed changes. So as I come to close, I want to ask you to think back. Are we helping bend the arc towards justice? Is the arc bending towards justice? And what can we do in this world to help strive for that justice so that we are not sleeping through the next revolution, so that we don't become complacent? Justice and peace must work together to achieve the beloved community that King spoke of and that we strive for. Going back to the opening words from King, justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. May we be inspired by the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. May we be inspired to continue showing up and siding with love. May we help bend the arc towards justice, even if we do not see the end of the arc. May we help build beloved community for a world that is more just, more loving, and more peaceful. May it be so. May we make it so. And blessed be. If you will now rise in body or in spirit, wherever you are, to join in singing our closing hymn, Love Will Guide Us, number 131 in the gray hymnal, and the words will be on the screens as well.
Away on the road.
As we extinguish this chalice, may we be reminded of what we carry with us when we leave this place. May the fire of commitment continue to burn in each of us. May it serve as an ever-present reminder of the beloved community of which we dream and of which we aspire to. May you go in peace and return in love.